The dusty streets of Austin, Texas, ran red with more than just clay that scorching afternoon in June of 1878, and Ruby Quinn knew if someone did not intervene within the next 10 minutes, she would hang from the gallows tree in the town square for a murder she did not commit. Callista Lawson watched from behind the rusted bars of her cell as the carpenter hammered the final nail into the platform that would become her deathbed. The sound echoed through the small jailhouse like a death knell, each strike a countdown to an ending she could not stop. Her hands trembled as she gripped the iron bars, her knuckles white against the rust and grime. She was 22 years old, and her life was about to end not because of any crime she committed, but because she had been in the wrong place at the wrong time when Gerald Hastings, the banker's son, had been shot dead in the Silver Star Saloon. The real killer had vanished into the night, leaving only Callista standing over the body with blood on her dress and shock painted across her face. No one believed her story about the masked man who had fired the shot. No one cared that she had tried to help Gerald, that the blood came from her desperate attempt to stop the bleeding. In a town like Austin, where women without families or protection were viewed with suspicion, her word meant nothing against the testimony of 3 drunk cowboys who swore they saw her holding a smoking gun. Ruby Quinn rode into town that same afternoon, his horse kicking up dust devils in the oppressive heat. He was a tall man, lean and weathered from years of driving cattle from Texas to Kansas and back again. At 28, he had seen enough of the world to know that justice and the law were not always the same thing. He had come to Austin to collect payment for a herd he had delivered 3 months prior, but the moment he dismounted outside the general store, he could feel the tension in the air like electricity before a storm. "They are hanging a woman at sunset," the store clerk said, his voice a mixture of excitement and disgust. "Killed Gerald Hastings in cold blood, they say." Ruby had never been one to involve himself in local affairs. He was a drifter by nature, never staying in one place long enough to form attachments or obligations. But something about the clerk's words stuck in his mind like a burr under a saddle. Women did not usually kill men in saloons, not unless they had been pushed far beyond reason. His curiosity got the better of him, and he made his way to the jailhouse, pushing through the gathering crowd that had already begun to assemble for the spectacle. Sheriff Porter was a mountain of a man, with a thick gray beard and eyes that had gone cold from seeing too much meanness in the world. He sat behind his desk, cleaning his rifle with methodical precision when Ruby walked through the door. "Come to see the murderess?" Porter asked without looking up. "Come to hear her side of things," Ruby replied, his voice steady. Porter laughed, a sound like gravel in a bucket. "Her side? Her side does not matter much when 3 witnesses saw what they saw." 3 drunk witnesses, Ruby said. He had already asked around, piecing together what had happened that night. Drunk men see all sorts of things that are not there. "You a lawyer?" Porter's eyes finally met Ruby's, and there was a warning in them. "Just a man who believes in fairness." "Fairness?" Porter set down his rifle. "Boy, fairness got nothing to do with the law. The law is what 12 men decided, and 12 men decided she is guilty. Now, unless you have new evidence, I suggest you move along. The hanging is scheduled for sunset, and nothing is going to change that." Ruby walked to the back of the jailhouse where the cells were kept. Callista sat on a thin cot, her dark hair hanging loose around her shoulders, her green eyes fixed on some point beyond the walls. She was beautiful in a way that made Ruby's chest tighten, not the painted beauty of saloon girls, but something genuine and untouched by the harshness of frontier life. When she looked up at him, he saw no guilt in her eyes, only a deep, bone-weary resignation. "They sent you to pray with me?" she asked, her voice hoarse from crying. "No, madam, I am not a preacher." Ruby removed his hat, holding it against his chest. "My name is Ruby Quinn. I am trying to understand what happened." Callista stood slowly, moving to the bars. Up close, Ruby could see the shadows under her eyes, the way her hands shook. "Does it matter? No one believes me. No one will believe me. Try me." She studied his face for a long moment, searching for something. Whatever she found must have satisfied her, because she began to speak, her words tumbling out in a rush. She told him about working at the boarding house, about saving every penny to eventually open her own dress shop. She told him about that night, about hearing the argument between Gerald Hastings and someone else, about the gunshot and her foolish decision to run toward the sound instead of away from it. She told him about finding Gerald bleeding on the saloon floor, about trying to help him, about the masked man who had fled through the back door. She told him about the gun that had been pressed into her hand, about the witnesses who had seen only what they wanted to see. "I did not kill him," she said, and Ruby believed her. He had heard enough lies in his life to recognize the truth when he heard it. "I believe you," he said simply. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "It does not matter. I am going to die anyway." Ruby's mind raced. There was no time to find the real killer, no time to gather evidence or convince the town of her innocence. The sun was already beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. He had perhaps 2 hours, maybe less. An idea formed in his mind, wild and reckless, but it was the only chance she had. "There might be a way," he said slowly. "It is not a good way, and you might not like it, but it could save your life." Callista gripped the bars. "What way? I will do anything. I do not want to die." "In Texas, they cannot hang a married woman without her husband's consent. It is an old law, barely ever used, but it is still on the books." Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed quickly by disbelief. "You want to marry me. You do not even know me. I know you are innocent. I know you do not deserve to hang. That is enough." Ruby looked at her steadily. "After you are free, we can annul the marriage. You can go your own way. But right now, it is the only thing I can think of that might work. Why would you do this for a stranger?" Ruby had asked himself the same question from the moment the idea entered his head. He did not know this woman, had no obligation to her, and every practical bone in his body told him to walk away. But he could not. Maybe it was the unfairness of it all, or maybe it was something in her eyes that called to something in him. Whatever the reason, he knew he could not stand by and watch an innocent woman hang. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said finally. Callista's tears flowed freely now. "If this works, I will owe you my life." "You will not owe me anything, just a chance to live." Ruby turned and strode back to Sheriff Porter's desk, his boot heels ringing against the wooden floor. "I want to marry the prisoner." Porter looked up from his rifle, his eyebrows disappearing into his hairline. "You want to what? Marry her, right now, before sunset?" "That is the craziest thing I have ever heard, and I have heard some crazy things. But it is legal. You cannot hang a married woman without her husband's consent, and I do not consent." Porter's face darkened. "That law is older than dirt. Nobody uses that law." "But it is still a law, is it not?" Ruby kept his voice calm, though his heart hammered in his chest. "Unless it has been repealed, it still stands." The sheriff stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "The town council is not going to like this. They want justice for Gerald Hastings. They want someone to pay for his death. Does not matter if it is the right someone, apparently." Ruby held his ground. "Get the judge. We are doing this by the book. If the law says I can marry her and stop the hanging, then that is what I am going to do." Porter stared at him for a long moment, then let out a long breath. "You are making a powerful enemy of the Hastings family." "I will take my chances." It took an hour to rouse Judge Morrison from his afternoon whiskey, and another 30 minutes to convince him that Ruby was serious. The judge was a wizened old man with a sharp mind still intact despite his fondness for drink. He arrived at the jailhouse with his law books under one arm and a skeptical expression on his weathered face. "This is highly irregular," Morrison said, flipping through one of his books. "But legal," Ruby pressed. Morrison adjusted his spectacles, reading and rereading the statute. Finally, he looked up. "It is legal technically. But son, do you understand what you are doing? Marriage is not something to enter into lightly, especially not to save someone from the gallows." "I understand perfectly, Your Honor. I want to marry Callista Lawson." The judge turned to where Callista stood behind the bars, her face pale but her chin raised. "And you, Miss Lawson, do you consent to this marriage?" "I do," she said, her voice stronger than Ruby expected. "Very well." Morrison shook his head. "I have been a judge for 30 years, and this is the strangest ceremony I have ever performed. But if you both are determined, let us proceed." They brought Callista out of the cell, her wrists still bound. Ruby stood beside her in the small jailhouse office, acutely aware of how bizarre the situation was. She smelled like fear and the lavender soap they gave prisoners, and when she looked up at him, her eyes were full of questions she did not ask. Judge Morrison performed the ceremony quickly, without the usual flourishes or sentimentality. "Do you, Ruby Quinn, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "And do you, Callista Lawson, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." Her voice trembled slightly. "By the power vested in me by the state of Texas, I pronounce you husband and wife." Morrison closed his book with a thud. "May God have mercy on both of your souls." Sheriff Porter removed Callista's bonds with obvious reluctance. "This does not mean she is free to leave town. She is still under suspicion." "But she is not under sentence of death," Ruby said. "That is good enough for now." The sun had just touched the horizon when they walked out of the jailhouse together. The crowd that had gathered for the hanging was still there, murmuring in confusion and anger. Ruby saw the Hastings family near the front, Gerald's father's face twisted with rage. "This is not over, Quinn," Benjamin Hastings shouted. "You have made an enemy today." Ruby did not respond, just placed a hand on the small of Callista's back and guided her through the crowd. She walked stiffly beside him, her body rigid with tension. They made their way to the boarding house where she had been staying, and Ruby paid the landlady for another week in advance, despite the woman's obvious disapproval. Once they were alone in the small room that served as Callista's home, the reality of what they had done seemed to settle over them both like a heavy blanket. Ruby stood near the door, suddenly unsure of himself. Callista sat on the edge of the narrow bed, her hands folded in her lap. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I know saying it is not enough, but thank you for my life." "You do not need to thank me." Ruby set his hat on the small table. "I could not let them hang you for something you did not do. What happens now?" It was a fair question, and one Ruby did not have a good answer for. "I suppose we figure out how to prove your innocence. As long as that murder hangs over your head, you are not truly free." "How do we do that? The real killer is long gone." "Maybe. Or maybe he is still in Austin, thinking he got away with it." Ruby pulled a chair away from the table and sat down. "Tell me everything again. Every detail you can remember about that night." Callista took a deep breath and began again, this time going slower, reaching for details she might have missed before. She described the masked man's height, his build, the way he moved. She described the gun, an unusual revolver with ivory handles. She described the argument she had heard, though she had not been able to make out the words. "Gerald was arguing with someone about money," she said. "I remember that much. Something about a debt that needed to be paid." Ruby's mind worked through the information. Gerald Hastings was a banker's son. Why would he need to worry about debts? I do not know, but he sounded desperate. They talked late into the night, Ruby asking questions and Callista searching her memory for answers. Somewhere around midnight, exhaustion finally caught up with them both. Ruby stood, stretching his stiff muscles. "I will find somewhere else to sleep," he said. "You need your rest." "Wait." Callista stood as well, wrapping her arms around herself. "I know this marriage is not real, not in the way marriages usually are. But you saved my life today, and I want you to know that I will not forget it. However long this arrangement lasts, I will do my best to be a good wife to you." Something in Ruby's chest tightened at her words. "You do not owe me anything, Callista. You are free to live your life however you want." "Am I?" She gestured around the small room. "I am married now, like it or not. The whole town knows it. Even if we prove my innocence, even if we annul the marriage later, I am your wife right now. I just want you to know that I take that seriously." Ruby looked at her in the dim lamplight, this brave woman who had faced down death with dignity and was now trying to make sense of an impossible situation. "I take it seriously too, and I promise you, I will find a way to clear your name." He left her then, finding a spot in the livery stable to bed down for the night. But sleep did not come easily. His mind kept returning to Callista, to the weight of what he had done, to the strange feeling that his life had just changed in ways he could not begin to understand. The next morning, Ruby began his investigation in earnest. He started at the Silver Star Saloon, talking to the bartender, the girls who worked there, anyone who might have seen something the night of the murder. Most people were reluctant to talk to him, word having spread about his marriage to the accused murderess. But Ruby was persistent, and he had learned long ago that persistence often paid off. It was the piano player, a thin man named Chester, who finally gave him something useful. "I saw Gerald that night," Chester said, his fingers idly running over the keys. "He was meeting with someone in the back room. I did not see who, but they were arguing something fierce." "About what?" Could not hear much over the music, but I caught the word gambling debts. Gerald had a problem with cards. Everyone knew it. His father kept bailing him out, but I guess he finally got in over his head. Ruby filed this information away. Gambling debts were a powerful motive for murder, but it did not tell him who had pulled the trigger. He spent the rest of the day following leads, talking to gamblers and card sharks, trying to piece together who Gerald Hastings might have owed money to. Meanwhile, Callista remained confined to the boarding house. The landlady made it clear she was not welcome in the common areas, and the other boarders whispered and stared whenever she emerged from her room. She spent her days sewing, the repetitive motion of the needle and thread keeping her hands busy while her mind raced with worry, and an emotion she did not quite understand when she thought about Ruby. He came to see her every evening, sharing what he had learned and discussing their next steps. These visits became the highlight of Callista's day. She found herself listening for his footsteps on the stairs, her heart lifting when she heard his knock on the door. They would sit together in the small room, talking about his investigation, but also about other things. She learned that he had been orphaned young, raised by an uncle who ran a cattle ranch. She learned that he loved the freedom of the open range, the way the sky seemed endless and full of possibility. She learned that despite his rough exterior, he had a kindness in him that ran deep. Ruby, for his part, found himself drawn to Callista in ways that caught him off guard. She was intelligent and thoughtful, asking questions that showed she was really listening. She had dreams beyond mere survival. She spoke passionately about the dress shop she wanted to open, about designs she had sketched, about building something of her own. And despite everything she had been through, she maintained a grace and dignity that made him want to protect her, to fight for her. 2 weeks into his investigation, Ruby finally caught a break. He was in a poker game at a saloon on the edge of town when a man named Pike, deep in his cups, started bragging about a job he had done for someone important. Pike was a known gun for hire, a man who would do anything for the right price. As the whiskey loosened his tongue, he let slip that he had been paid to kill Gerald Hastings, though he claimed he had only been hired to scare the young banker into paying his debts. Ruby kept his face neutral, continuing to play cards while his mind raced. When the game broke up near dawn, he followed Pike out into the street. The confrontation was brief and brutal. Pike, drunk and slow, was no match for Ruby's speed and determination. Within minutes, Ruby had him pinned against the wall of the alley, demanding the truth. "I did not mean to kill him." Pike gasped out. "I was just supposed to rough him up, make him understand that his debts needed to be paid. But he fought back, reached for a gun, and I panicked. When that woman came running in, I put the gun in her hand and ran. I did not know they would try to hang her for it. Who hired you?" Ruby's forearm pressed harder against Pike's throat. "Give me a name." "I cannot. He will kill me." "I will kill you right now if you do not talk." Pike's eyes went wide with fear, and he gasped out a name that made Ruby's blood run cold. "James Hastings, Gerald's brother." He wanted Gerald dead so he would inherit everything. Their father's fortune, the bank, all of it. Ruby released Pike, his mind reeling. James Hastings was one of the most powerful men in Austin, serving on the town council and running the family bank. Accusing him of murder would be dangerous, potentially deadly, but it was the truth, and Callista deserved the truth. "You are going to tell that to the sheriff," Ruby said. "You are going to confess everything." Pike shook his head frantically. "They will hang me." "Better you than an innocent woman. You have one chance to do the right thing. Take it." It took another hour of persuasion and threats before Pike finally agreed. They walked to the sheriff's office together as the sun rose, painting Austin in shades of gold and pink. Sheriff Porter listened to Pike's confession with a grim expression, writing down every word. When Pike signed the confession, Porter looked up at Ruby. "This is going to cause trouble," the sheriff said. "James Hastings is not the kind of man you want to cross." "The truth is the truth," Ruby replied. "Callista deserves to have her name cleared." Porter nodded slowly. "I will bring James in for questioning. But Quinn, watch your back. The Hastings family does not forgive easily." Ruby went directly to the boarding house, taking the stairs 2 at a time. He knocked on Callista's door, and when she opened it, the hope in her eyes nearly undid him. "We have him," he said. "The real killer confessed. You are going to be cleared." Callista's knees went weak, and Ruby caught her, his arms going around her to steady her. She buried her face in his chest, her body shaking with sobs of relief. Ruby held her, one hand gently stroking her hair, murmuring that she was safe now, that everything would be all right. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were red but shining. "How did you do it?" He told her everything, and as he spoke, her expression changed from relief to concern. "James Hastings will come after you, after us. Let him try." Ruby's voice was hard. "We have the law on our side now." But the law moved slowly, and the Hastings family moved fast. That very afternoon, Ruby was ambushed on his way to the general store. 3 men jumped him in an alley, and though he fought hard, he was outnumbered. They beat him bloody, leaving him in the dirt with a warning to leave Austin and take his wife with him. Callista found him there an hour later, alerted by a street child who had witnessed the attack. She helped him back to the boarding house, cleaning his wounds with gentle hands while tears streamed down her face. "This is my fault," she whispered. "You should never have married me. You should never have gotten involved." Ruby caught her hand, despite the pain it caused him to move. "Stop that. I made my choice and I would make it again. We are going to see this through. They could kill you next time. Then we make sure there is not a next time." Ruby sat up slowly, wincing. "We need to be smart about this. Stay together, stay in public places where they cannot come after us without witnesses." Over the next week, as Pike's confession was investigated and James Hastings was formally charged with conspiracy to commit murder, Ruby and Callista became inseparable. They took their meals together at the boarding house, walked the streets of Austin together, and spent their evenings talking in her small room. The danger they faced brought them closer, but it was more than that. They genuinely enjoyed each other's company, finding comfort and joy in conversations that ranged from the serious to the silly. Ruby discovered that Callista had a sharp sense of humor that emerged when she felt safe. Callista discovered that Ruby could be surprisingly tender, his rough cowboy exterior hiding a man who noticed the small things, who remembered the details she mentioned in passing. One evening, as they sat together by lamplight, Callista working on a dress she was sewing and Ruby cleaning his rifle, she asked the question that had been on her mind for days. "When this is all over, when my name is cleared and it is safe again, are we going to annul the marriage?" Ruby's hand stilled on his rifle. He had been asking himself the same question. "Do you want to? I asked you first." But there was something in her voice, a vulnerability that made Ruby set down his rifle and turn to face her fully. "Honestly, when I married you, I thought it would be temporary. A legal maneuver to save your life, nothing more. But these past weeks, getting to know you, being with you, it has not felt temporary. It has felt right." He paused, searching for the right words. "You have become important to me, Callista. More important than I ever expected." She set down her sewing, her hands trembling slightly. "You have become important to me too. I find myself thinking about you when you are not here, looking forward to seeing you, dreading the day when you might leave. Is that foolish of me? To develop feelings for a man I barely know?" Ruby moved to sit beside her on the bed, taking her hand in his. "If it is foolish, then I am a fool too, because I have developed feelings for you as well. Strong feelings that I do not quite know what to do with." "What do we do?" she asked softly. "We take it one day at a time. We clear your name, deal with the Hastings family, and then we figure out what comes next, together." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "If you are willing, I am willing." She smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I am very willing." The trial of James Hastings became the talk of Austin. The evidence against him was substantial. Pike's confession, combined with financial records that showed James deeply in debt and desperate for his inheritance, painted a clear picture of motive and opportunity. The prosecution was thorough, and despite James's expensive lawyers and his family's influence, the jury found him guilty. On the day of the verdict, Ruby and Callista sat in the courtroom, his hand holding hers tightly. When the foreman read the guilty verdict, Callista's tears flowed freely, tears of relief and vindication. The judge formally cleared her of all charges, declaring her innocent of Gerald Hastings' murder. Walking out of that courthouse, Callista felt lighter than she had in months. The weight of accusation and fear had been lifted, replaced by a future that was once again full of possibilities. Ruby walked beside her, his arm around her waist, and she leaned into him, grateful for his strength and his unwavering support. That night, they celebrated at the boarding house with a simple meal and cheaper wine than either would have preferred. But it did not matter. They had each other, and they had the truth on their side. As the evening wore on and the conversation flowed, Ruby found himself watching Callista, admiring the way the lamplight caught in her hair, the way her eyes sparkled when she laughed. "What are you thinking?" she asked, catching him staring. "I am thinking that I want to kiss you," he said honestly. "I have wanted to for a while now, but I did not want you to feel obligated or pressured." Callista set down her wine glass and moved closer to him. "I would not feel obligated, I would feel cherished." Ruby cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. "You are cherished. You are so very cherished." When he kissed her, it was gentle at first, a soft press of lips that held a question and a promise. But when Callista responded, her arms going around his neck, the kiss deepened, becoming something more passionate and consuming. They broke apart, both breathing hard, and Ruby rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said, the words surprising him even as he spoke them. But they were true, undeniably true. "I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you in that cell, so brave and determined not to break." "I love you too," Callista replied. "You saved my life, but more than that, you gave me a reason to want to live it. You showed me what it means to have someone believe in you, fight for you." They spent that night together, truly together as husband and wife, and it was everything and more than either had imagined. Ruby was gentle and patient, making sure Callista felt safe and loved every moment. And Callista gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back, trusting him with all that she was. In the weeks that followed, they began to build a life together. Ruby used his savings to help Callista open her dress shop, a small storefront on Main Street with big windows that let in the light. Callista threw herself into the work, designing and sewing dresses that quickly became popular with the women of Austin. Ruby, meanwhile, continued working as a ranch hand and cattle driver, though he made sure he was home more often than not, unwilling to be away from his wife for long periods. The Hastings family, diminished by James's conviction and the scandal that followed, eventually left Austin, selling the bank and moving east. With them gone, the shadow that had hung over Ruby and Callista's marriage lifted completely. They were free to be simply what they were, two people deeply in love, building a life together in the wild heart of Texas. One evening, about 6 months after the trial, Ruby came home to find Callista in the shop, working late on a particularly intricate wedding dress. He watched her from the doorway, marveling at her skill and dedication, at the way she bit her lower lip when she concentrated. "Come to bed," he said softly. "The dress will still be here tomorrow." She looked up, smiling. "I am almost finished, just a few more stitches." He moved to stand behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders. "You work too hard," says the man who spent 14 hours in the saddle yesterday. But she leaned back against him, savoring his warmth and presence. "I have been thinking," Ruby said, "about us, about our future." "What about it?" "I want to buy us a piece of land. Nothing huge, just enough for a house and maybe a small herd. I am tired of living in rented rooms. I want to build something permanent with you." Callista set down her needle and turned to face him. "You want to settle down. You, who told me you loved the freedom of the range." "I did love it, but I love you more. And I am discovering that freedom is not about being able to go anywhere. It is about choosing where you want to be. I choose to be with you, wherever that is." She stood and kissed him, pouring all her love and happiness into that kiss. "Then let us find our piece of land. Let us build our home." They spent the next month looking at properties around Austin, searching for the perfect spot. They finally found it 10 miles outside of town. A beautiful stretch of land with a creek running through it, and live oak trees that provided shade from the brutal Texas sun. The property came with a small, somewhat run-down house that had been abandoned by its previous owners, but Ruby saw potential in it, and Callista saw home. They bought the land with their combined savings, leaving them nearly broke but filled with excitement and purpose. Ruby threw himself into repairs, fixing the roof, replacing broken windows, reinforcing the walls. Callista cleaned and decorated, using her skills to make curtains and cushions, transforming the bare house into a warm and welcoming home. They worked side by side, and in the evenings, they would sit on the porch they had built together, watching the sun set over their land, talking about their dreams and plans. Ruby wanted to build up a herd of cattle, to create a ranch that they could pass down to their children someday. Callista wanted to expand her dress shop, maybe hire other seamstresses, create something that would last. "We are quite a pair," Callista said one evening, her head resting on Ruby's shoulder. "A drifting cowboy and an accused murderess." "Former drifting cowboy," Ruby corrected. "An innocent woman wrongly accused. We have rewritten our stories." "Yes, we have." She smiled, looking out over their land. "Together." Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. Money was tight as they poured everything into the ranch and the shop. There were disagreements about priorities and spending, moments of frustration when things did not go as planned. But through it all, they talked, they listened, and they remembered why they had chosen each other. The foundation of their marriage, built on honesty and sacrifice, proved strong enough to weather the storms. Callista discovered she was pregnant in the spring of 1879. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when Doc Harrison confirmed it, she felt a mixture of joy and terror. She had never thought much about children before, too focused on survival and then on building her business. But now, with Ruby's child growing inside her, she found herself overwhelmed with love for this tiny life. Telling Ruby was one of the best moments of her life. She waited until evening, until they were alone in their home, the day's work done. She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby," she said softly. Ruby's eyes went wide, and for a moment he could not speak. Then he was lifting her up, spinning her around, laughing and crying at the same time. "A baby! We are going to have a baby!" He set her down gently, immediately concerned. "Should I have done that? I did not hurt you, did I?" Callista laughed. "I am pregnant, not made of glass." "But yes, we are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Happy does not even begin to cover it. He pulled her close, holding her carefully now as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I love you so much, both of you." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Callista had to slow down at the shop, hiring her first employee, a young woman named Martha, to help with the workload. Ruby became almost comically protective, insisting that Callista rest more, eat more, avoid anything that might be remotely dangerous. She found his concern endearing, even when it became excessive. Their son was born in January of 1880, on a cold night when the wind howled around their little house. The labor was long and difficult, and Ruby paced outside the bedroom, going half mad with worry while Doc Harrison and the midwife attended to Callista. But when he finally heard the baby's cry, strong and lusty, he nearly collapsed with relief. Doc Harrison opened the door. "You have a healthy boy. And your wife is doing well, though she is exhausted." Ruby entered the room to find Callista propped up in bed, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with tired eyes that shone with love and pride. "Meet your son," she said. Ruby approached slowly, almost reverently. When he looked down at the baby's tiny face, something in his chest cracked open. This was his son, his and Callista's, a perfect combination of them both. The baby had Callista's dark hair and what Ruby suspected would be his own gray eyes. "He is perfect," Ruby whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you for this gift." They named him Robert Quinn after Ruby's father. Little Robert was a demanding baby, crying often and sleeping little, but neither parent minded. Ruby discovered he loved being a father, loved holding his son, singing to him, watching him grow and change each day. Callista marveled at how natural Ruby was with the baby, how gentle this rough cowboy could be with something so small and fragile. The ranch continued to grow. Ruby bought his first cattle with money he borrowed from the bank, paying it back through sheer hard work and determination. He hired a few hands to help during roundup season, young cowboys who were impressed by how much Ruby had built from nothing. The shop, too, continued to thrive, with Martha proving to be an excellent seamstress and Callista's designs gaining a reputation throughout Austin. Their second child, a daughter they named Clara, was born 2 years later. She was an easier baby than Robert had been, content to sleep and eat and observe the world with wide, curious eyes. Robert, now a toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to help to hold her, to show her his toys. Ruby and Callista's love continued to deepen with each passing year. They had built something real and lasting, something that went far beyond the desperate marriage that had saved Callista's life. They were partners in every sense of the word, supporting each other's dreams, sharing the burdens and the joys of life. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Ruby took Callista back into Austin for a rare dinner at the hotel restaurant. They had left the children with Martha for the evening, and it felt strange and wonderful to be alone together, just the two of them like in the early days. "You ever regret it?" Callista asked over dessert. "Marrying me the way you did, all the trouble it brought you." Ruby reached across the table, taking her hand. "Never, not for a single moment. Marrying you was the best decision I ever made. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me everything." "You gave me my life," Callista said, tears gathering in her eyes. "Literally and figuratively. Before you, I was just surviving, just getting through each day. You showed me what it means to truly live, to love, to build something meaningful. We built it together." Ruby lifted her hand to his lips. "And we are going to keep building it for the rest of our lives." As the years passed, the Quinn Ranch became one of the most successful in the area. Ruby's reputation as an honest, hardworking rancher spread, and he was respected throughout the county. Callista's dress shop expanded to a larger location, and she employed 5 seamstresses, creating not just dresses but a thriving business that provided good jobs for women in Austin. Robert grew into a serious, studious boy who loved books and learning. Clara was more adventurous, following her father around the ranch, begging to ride horses and help with the cattle. They added 2 more children to their family over the years. Another boy they named Samuel, and finally another daughter, Elizabeth, born when Callista was 33 and convinced they were done having children. The house expanded along with the family. Ruby added rooms, built a larger porch, created a home that was full of life and laughter and love. There were difficult times, of course. A drought one year that nearly wiped them out. An illness that swept through the family, leaving them all weak but thankfully alive. Disagreements and arguments that came from living together, from the stress of running businesses and raising children. But through everything, Ruby and Callista held fast to each other. They never forgot how they began, the desperate circumstances that brought them together, the choice Ruby made to save a stranger's life. That foundation of sacrifice and courage remained the bedrock of their marriage, reminding them of what truly mattered when the small annoyances of daily life threatened to overwhelm them. When Robert turned 18, he announced his intention to go to university back east to study law. Ruby was proud but sad to see his oldest child leave. Callista was both supportive and terrified, worried about her son so far from home. But they let him go, understanding that part of loving your children meant letting them find their own paths. Clara, at 16, was already proving to be a talented horsewoman and rancher. She had no interest in leaving, declaring that the Quinn ranch would be hers someday, and she needed to learn everything about running it. Ruby spent hours teaching her, and Callista watched with amusement and pride as her daughter became a cowgirl in her own right. Samuel showed an aptitude for business, helping his mother with the shop's accounts and showing an interest in expansion and growth. Elizabeth, the baby, was still finding her way, but at 13, she showed signs of being artistic, filling notebooks with sketches and paintings. On a warm evening in June of 1893, 15 years after that fateful day when Ruby rode into Austin and changed both their lives forever, Ruby and Callista sat on their porch watching the sun set. Their children were grown or growing, their businesses were thriving, and their land stretched out before them, a testament to everything they had built together. "You remember what you said to me that day in the jail cell?" Callista asked, her hand in Ruby's. "You said you believed me." "I remember. It was the truth. No one had believed me in so long. Everyone assumed the worst because I was alone, because I had no one to vouch for me. And then you came along, a complete stranger, and you believed me without question. You saved my life with those words as surely as you saved it with the marriage." Ruby squeezed her hand. "You have more than repaid any debt you might have imagined you owed me. It was never about debt." Callista looked at him, this man she had loved for 15 years, whose face she knew better than her own. "It was about love. I spent my life loving you, Ruby Quinn. Every single day since you walked into that jailhouse, I have loved you more than the day before." "And I have loved you," Ruby replied. "Every morning I wake up next to you, I thank God for giving me the courage to do something crazy that day, to marry a woman I did not know, to save her from an unjust death, because that decision brought me everything worth having in this life." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sky turned from orange to pink to purple. In the distance, they could hear Clara calling the cattle, Samuel's laughter as he joked with one of the ranch hands, Elizabeth singing as she painted in her room. The sounds of their life, their family, everything they had created. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Ruby pulled Callista closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder, exactly where she belonged. They had started with nothing but a legal necessity and a desperate hope. They had built an empire of love, family, and purpose. And they would spend whatever time they had left continuing to build, continuing to love, continuing to choose each other every single day. The story that began with a cowboy marrying a woman to save her life had become so much more. It had become a testament to the power of believing in someone, of taking a chance on love, of fighting for what was right even when it was difficult. It had become a legacy they would pass down to their children and grandchildren, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. And as they sat together in the gathering darkness, Ruby and Callista Quinn knew without a doubt that they had lived a life worth living, that they had loved well and deeply, and that their story would endure long after they were gone. It was a story of courage and sacrifice, of justice and redemption, but most of all it was a story of love, pure and simple and true. Years continued to pass in their familiar rhythm. The ranch prospered beyond Ruby's wildest dreams. What had started as a small herd grew into hundreds of head of cattle. The Quinn brand became recognized throughout Texas as a mark of quality. Ruby hired more hands, built better barns and fences, and eventually became one of the largest employers in the county. Callista's business, too, reached heights she had never imagined. Her shop became the premier dressmaker in Austin, with wealthy women coming from as far as San Antonio and Houston to commission her designs. She never forgot her humble beginnings, though, and made sure to keep a line of simpler, affordable dresses for working women who needed quality clothing they could actually afford. Robert did go east for university and returned with a law degree and a wife, a kind woman named Sarah from Boston. They settled in Austin, where Robert opened his practice, focusing on defending people who could not afford expensive lawyers. Like his father before him, he believed in fighting for those who had no one else to fight for them. Clara never did leave the ranch. She married a cowboy named Thomas Reed when she was 21, a good man who understood that he was not just marrying Clara, but marrying into the Quinn ranch legacy. Together, they worked alongside Ruby, and it became clear that when the time came, the ranch would be in capable hands. Samuel took over the business side of both the ranch and the dress shop, implementing modern bookkeeping techniques he had learned from studying business journals. His organizational skills and financial acumen helped both businesses grow even more profitable. He married a schoolteacher named Margaret, and they built a house on the edge of the Quinn property. Elizabeth, the artist, moved to Austin, where she opened a small gallery. She never married, declaring herself too independent for such constraints, but she was happy, surrounded by her art and her family who visited often. Her paintings of ranch life became popular, capturing the beauty and hardship of frontier living in ways that moved people deeply. By 1905, Ruby and Callista were in their mid-50s, still healthy and active but beginning to feel the years catching up with them. They had 11 grandchildren between their 4 children, and the Quinn family gatherings were loud, chaotic, and filled with love. One Sunday afternoon, the whole family had gathered for supper at the ranch house, which had been expanded yet again to accommodate everyone. Children ran through the house and yard, cousins playing together while their parents talked and laughed. Ruby stood on the porch, watching the chaos with a satisfied smile. Callista came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" "I am thinking about how different my life could have been. If I had not ridden into Austin that day, if I had minded my own business. If I had not made that crazy decision to marry a woman I did not know. You wonder what would have happened to me?" Ruby turned to her, his expression serious. "Sometimes, and it makes me sick to think about it, you would have died for a crime you did not commit, all this." He gestured to the family gathered around them. "None of this would exist. Our children, our grandchildren, everything we built. It all hinged on that one moment." "I think about it too," Callista admitted, "about how close I came to losing everything before I ever had it. About how one person's courage and compassion saved my life and gave me everything worth living for." Ruby pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "We saved each other. You gave me a home, a purpose, a reason to stop drifting and start building. Before you, I was just passing through life. You made me want to stay. We made a good life together, did we not?" Callista asked, though she knew the answer. "The best life. Better than I ever dreamed possible." They stood together, watching their legacy unfold before them. Robert was teaching his oldest son about justice and fairness, the same lessons Ruby had taught him. Clara was showing her daughters how to sit a horse properly, passing down skills Callista had never imagined her daughter would need. Samuel was playing a complicated hand game with his children, teaching them about numbers and strategy. Elizabeth had brought her newest painting to show everyone, and the family was gathered around it, praising her talent. "You think they understand?" Callista asked. "How precious this all is. How easily it might never have existed. We will make sure they do. We will tell them the story, all of it. How we met, why we married, how we fell in love. They need to know that everything worth having comes from being willing to take chances, to fight for what is right, to believe in people even when no one else does." That evening, after supper had been eaten and the dishes cleared, the family gathered in the large living room. The children were settled on the floor, the adults in chairs around the room. Ruby stood by the fireplace, Callista beside him, and they told their story. They told about the murder accusation, about the gallows being built, about Ruby's decision to marry a stranger to save her life. They told about the investigation, the danger they faced, the truth they fought to uncover. They told about falling in love, about building the ranch and the shop, about the struggles and triumphs that marked their journey together. The children listened with wide eyes, the adults with tears in theirs. When the story ended, there was silence for a long moment before their oldest grandson, Robert's boy William, spoke up. "Grandfather, were you scared when you decided to marry grandmother?" Ruby considered the question seriously. "Yes, I was scared. I was marrying a woman I did not know, making an enemy of one of the most powerful families in Austin, putting myself in danger. But I was more scared of what would happen if I did nothing." Sometimes being brave is not about not being afraid. It is about doing the right thing even when you are terrified. "Why did you believe her when no one else did?" Clara's daughter asked. Callista answered this time. "Because your grandfather has always been a man who sees people for who they truly are, not what others say about them. He looked at me and saw beyond the accusations and the fear. He saw truth. That gift has served him well all his life." The stories continued late into the night, family members sharing memories, asking questions, reinforcing the bonds that held them all together. When the younger children finally fell asleep, and the adults began gathering their families to head home, Callista felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what it was all for. This legacy of love and courage, this family that existed because two people had been brave enough to take a chance on each other. As they prepared for bed that night, Ruby caught Callista's hand, pulling her close. Even after all these years, the touch of her still made his heart race. "I love you more today than I did yesterday, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." It was something he said often, a ritual between them. Callista smiled, standing on her toes to kiss him. "And I love you beyond measure, beyond time, beyond anything in this world." The years continued their march forward. Ruby's hair turned from dark brown to silver, and his steps slowed slightly, though he still rode out to check on the cattle every day. Callista's hands developed arthritis, making sewing difficult, but she continued to design, her creative mind as sharp as ever. They celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary in 1908 with a huge party that brought together not just family but the entire community. The little girl who would have hanged for a crime she did not commit, and the drifting cowboy who saved her had become pillars of Austin society, respected and loved by all who knew them. Ruby gave a speech at the party, raising a glass to Callista. 30 years ago, I made the best decision of my life. I married this woman here, and she has made every day since worth living. She taught me what love really means. Not just the easy love of good times, but the hard love that weathers storms and comes out stronger. She taught me about courage, about never giving up even when the world seems set against you. She taught me about grace, about forgiveness, about building something that lasts. To my wife, my partner, my love, thank you for 30 years of the most extraordinary life I could have imagined." Callista stood, her eyes bright with tears. "And to my husband who saw me when I was invisible, who believed me when I was doubted, who loved me when I was unlovable. You did not just save my life that day in the jailhouse. You gave me a reason to live it fully, joyfully, completely. Everything good in my life came from your courage and your compassion. I love you today and always." The party lasted until dawn, filled with music and dancing and laughter. And when it was finally over and Ruby and Callista were alone in their bedroom, they held each other close, two people who had weathered everything life could throw at them and emerged victorious. In the summer of 1912, Ruby fell ill. It started as a cough that would not go away, then developed into something more serious. Doc Harrison, now himself an old man, examined Ruby and delivered news that made Callista's heart stop. "His lungs are failing," the doctor said quietly. "Too many years breathing in dust from the range. There is not much I can do beyond making him comfortable." Callista refused to accept it at first, trying every remedy, every treatment she could find. But as the weeks passed and Ruby continued to weaken, she had to face the reality that their time together was drawing to a close. Ruby faced his mortality with the same courage he had faced everything else in life. He spent his remaining strength putting his affairs in order, making sure Callista and the children would be taken care of, ensuring that the ranch would continue to prosper under Clara and Thomas's management. On a warm evening in September, with autumn just beginning to touch the Texas landscape, Ruby called his family together. They gathered around his bed, Callista holding his hand, their children and grandchildren filling the room. "I need you all to know," Ruby said, his voice weak but clear, "that I have had a blessed life. I have been given more than any man deserves. A wife who loved me, children who made me proud, grandchildren who bring joy to my heart, a legacy that will outlast me. I have no regrets except that I will not have more time with all of you." He turned to Callista, his eyes finding hers. "My love, my heart, my everything. Thank you for choosing to love me. Thank you for the life we built together. Thank you for being exactly who you are." Callista could barely speak through her tears. "I am the one who should thank you. You gave me everything. You were my hero, my love, my home." "Promise me something," Ruby said. "Promise me you will keep living, really living. Do not close yourself off from joy because I am gone. You have so much more to give to this world." "I promise," Callista whispered, though she could not imagine how she would keep that promise. Ruby spent the next few days saying goodbye to each of his children individually, imparting final words of wisdom and love. He told Robert to continue fighting for justice, to never forget that the law should serve people, not power. He told Clara that the ranch was in good hands and that she should trust her instincts. He told Samuel to keep taking care of the family, to use his talents to help them prosper. He told Elizabeth that her art mattered, that beauty was as necessary as bread in this hard world. On a clear night when the stars seemed close enough to touch, with Callista beside him holding his hand, Ruby took his last breath. He went peacefully, a slight smile on his face, his last sight being the face of the woman he had loved for 34 years. The funeral was the largest Austin had ever seen. People came from all over Texas to pay their respects to the man who had built an empire on honesty and hard work, who had stood up for justice when it was dangerous to do so, who had loved deeply and well. But for Callista, all of it passed in a blur of grief. The weeks after Ruby's death were the hardest of Callista's life, harder even than waiting to hang for a murder she did not commit. At least then she had had hope, had Ruby fighting for her. Now the man who had been her rock, her partner, her love was gone and she felt utterly adrift. Her children rallied around her, making sure she was never alone, taking care of the details she could not face. But in the quiet moments, in the empty bed where Ruby should have been, Callista felt a grief so profound it threatened to swallow her whole. She remembered her promise to Ruby to keep living, but she did not know how. Then one day, about a month after the funeral, her youngest grandson came to visit. He was 5 years old, and he climbed into her lap and asked her to tell him about his grandfather, so Callista did. She told him about the day Ruby rode into Austin, about the marriage that saved her life, about falling in love with a man who had started as a stranger. And in the telling, she felt something shift inside her. Ruby was gone, but his legacy lived on in these children and grandchildren, in the ranch he had built, in the life they had created together. Slowly, painfully, Callista began to rebuild her life around the hole Ruby had left. She threw herself into the dress shop, training the next generation of seamstresses. She spent time with her grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, making sure they knew the man he had been. She took up painting alongside Elizabeth, finding solace in creating beauty from grief. Years passed, and Callista grew old, her hair turning white, her step growing slower. But she never remarried, never even considered it. She had had the love of her life, and that was enough. Ruby had given her 34 years of joy and partnership, and she would honor his memory by living fully, just as she had promised. On warm evenings, she would sit on the porch of the ranch house, looking out over the land she and Ruby had built together. Sometimes she swore she could feel his presence beside her, could almost hear his voice on the wind. And she would talk to him, telling him about the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, about the ranch's successes, about how much she missed him. Callista lived to be 81 years old, remaining sharp and engaged until the very end. She died peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1931, surrounded by the family she and Ruby had created. Her last words were reported to be, "I am coming, my love. Wait for me." They buried her beside Ruby under the live oak trees on the ranch, their graves marked with a simple headstone that read, Ruby Quinn, 1850–1912, and Callista Quinn, 1850–1931. United in life, united in death. A love that saved lives and built legacies. The Quinn Ranch continued for generations, passed down through Clara's line. The dress shop eventually closed in the 1940s, but Elizabeth's paintings of her parents and the ranch life they built became valuable, hanging in museums across Texas. Robert's descendants continued the tradition of fighting for justice, producing lawyers, judges, and activists who made the world a better place. The story of Ruby and Callista became family legend, told and retold at gatherings, written down in journals and letters, preserved as a reminder of what love and courage could accomplish. It was a story about second chances and first loves, about the choice to believe in someone when the world said they were guilty, about building something lasting from the most desperate of circumstances. Most of all, it was a story about how one decision, one moment of courage, could change not just 2 lives but generations to come. Ruby had married a woman to save her life, not knowing that in doing so, he was also saving his own, giving himself purpose and meaning and love beyond measure. And Callista had spent her life loving him, yes, but also building on the foundation he had given her, creating a legacy that honored his courage and her resilience. Their great-great-grandchildren still live on the Quinn Ranch, still raise cattle under the Texas sun, still tell the story of how it all began. And sometimes, on warm evenings when the stars are bright and the wind whispers through the live oak trees, they swear they can feel the presence of Ruby and Callista, still watching over the land they loved, still together even in death as they had been in life. It was a love story for the ages, born in darkness and desperation, but blooming into something beautiful and enduring. A cowboy who married a woman to save her life, and a woman who spent hers loving him in return. In the end, they saved each other, and in saving each other, they created something that would outlast them both, a testament to the power of love, courage, and the simple human choice to do what is right, no matter the cost.